Hi everyone, it's Andrew from Cocktails in the City, and continue our conversations with bars and bartenders. Very happy to be joined today by Elliot Ball from the, well, many bars, and he can introduce them a bit better in a second. We had a conversation last week and he made a very interesting point, and very pertinent at this time, that he believes you can actually make really great drinks, almost probably better than bar drinks at home for some very specific reasons. And we're here to sort of talk about that, really. What makes a great drink? What makes Cocktail Trading Company and his sort of group of bars so unique? And we'll see where this conversation goes. So, Elliot, we've worked together for many years over different things. If you could introduce yourself, your business, and you, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So hi, I'm Elliot Ball. I work for a company in London. And we have two bars here. One is Cocktail Trading Co., which is where I am today. And we almost coming up on a year ago launched Murder Inc. Over in Soho. And then we have two sister bars, which we launched with our wonderful Bristol business partner, Ben Alcock, which are Her Majesty's Secret Service, and more recently, Filthy 13.
And whenever I've spoken to you and we've done some stuff on the boutique bar show before, you tend to take a very sort of scientific approach to your drinks and understanding of drinks. And is that something you'll be talking about today?
Yes and no. The funny thing is, one of the like defining moments in my professional history was meeting Andy and Ollie, who are my two business partners for Cocktail Trading Co. and Murder Inc. And they both have an amazing approach to hospitality and drinks, but one which is often intentionally unscientific. And it kind of re-educated me in that, if the net outcome is what matters, how you got there isn't always that important. And I think a lot of the time people kind of hide behind their science and justification of stuff. So I definitely was like overly scientific for quite a long time. And then I kind of steadily learned to just sort of reel that back and focus more on like the end outcome for the consumer, which definitely factors in with drinks at home.
Yeah. And so today we're going to talk about, basically, in your mind, or either you or the collective of Cocktail Trading Company and your sister bars, of like, what makes a great drink?
Just pretty much whatever the customer really enjoys. Coming back very briefly to the science point, if you have a spreadsheet that tells you that something's the best drink ever, that doesn't matter at all if the customer doesn't like it. A spreadsheet that sort of confines a matrix of whether or not the customer is going to enjoy something would arguably be much more valuable. And certainly one of the things we teach in our masterclasses for people, making drinks at home is about, what to communicate, what things pretty much everyone likes, what things pretty much everyone dislikes, what things to, steer clear of.
And would you be able to sort of share some of the points that you make in your Cocktail Trading Company masterclasses with us today? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you.
All right. Well, as I say, like the whole point of this is, and part of why I kind of stepped away from such a scientific approach is because to me, subjectivity outweighs objectivity. And a lot of the time, the intense application of objectivity, of like being super scientific about stuff, is often just kind of counterproductive to what you want to achieve in a bar, in terms of the actual fun. I don't really want to get served by someone in a lab coat, I guess. But for drinks at home, one of the main things that they have in common in a good or a bad setting for a bar is the atmosphere itself. And Andy and Ollie particularly had an understanding of atmosphere that I've always really lacked compared to them. And in working with them, I guess I picked up on it much more. And, there's a lot of people who talk about it, how you can have, a bad drink in a great bar and have a wonderful time, whereas a great drink in a bar with a horrible atmosphere is usually, kind of goes under the radar. For one, you tend not to notice how good it is. But for two, the net experience is often just not very good anyway. And the same thing really goes at home. So the comparison I'll often draw is like dinner parties. The first dinner party anyone ever hosts is usually a really stressful affair. And that stress is not a nice thing. If you walk into a bar where everyone's been waiting 40 minutes for their drink, the staff haven't been paid this month, and everyone's stressed and pissed off, and the owner's in the corner with a storm cloud over his or her head because they're not making the right sales, that's a horrible atmosphere. And, we humans are deeply sociable human beings, and we do have a sixth seventh, eighth. We've got 100 sensors to detect social discord, stress, and that kind of thing. And so like I can talk all day about balancing a sweet and sour, what the neurological implications of perceiving salt and bitterness are, etc. But the main thing for me for making drinks at home has always been about establishing a good atmosphere, largely not by supplying things which are good, just by avoiding the bad things. You know, if you've invited a good group of friends over, they're actually going to supply the atmosphere. The important thing is not to supply an additional and more prevalent, stressful and negative atmosphere.
And are there some sort of top tips for reducing the chance of that for a cocktails at home party?
Yeah, pretty much a million times over. So the first thing is like, and it's kind of boring, but it's just doing a bit of planning. Planning takes two forms in that, you know, plan it all, such as raiding the liquor cabinet half cut at 2 a.m. That never makes a good drink. Absolutely never. It doesn't matter how good you are at it, it's not going to be good. But the other thing is like the actual assembly of a drink can either be simple or it can be a little bit complicated. Let's say you're going to produce a meal, starter, main, dessert. Your starter is going to be a beautiful cold gazpacho or something like that. Your dessert, maybe some kind of cheesecake. If you've got half a brain, you're making that cheesecake yesterday so that you can leave it in the fridge, have a nice cold cheesecake. And the gazpacho similarly, I mean, for that one in particular, it makes sense to do it in advance. But even if it was a hot soup, it would make sense to make it in advance. Simply reheat, minimize your stress, focus on the main course, get all the plating and distribution, just sort it and make your life easy. And that way you haven't got everyone kind of desperately trying to help, which is, it's awkward. You go to your friend's house and you feel that your presence is causing them stress and they're having a bad time as a result. And then you as a host are seeing that they are kind of a bit weird and they definitely want to help. And then you get resentful of yourself and them, and it's just a nasty cycle. And cocktails are a similar thing, you know. The difference between a cook and a chef isn't the quality of what you can make. It's just whether or not you can execute quickly, cleanly, efficiently, ideally without decapitating spouse/KP. When it comes to like making a bowl of punch, for example, you can do a great deal of the work in advance. And while, yeah, it's pretty cool to have your friends be a badass and roll some drinks together and stuff like that, you know, a beautiful looking punch bowl garnished up nicely, that's going to get people going as well. And that doesn't need to have any stress assigned to it.
Yeah, so in sort of summary there, the more preparation and more preparation you can do in advance, so there's less to do on the day in front of your friends when they're actually there, is going to increase and improve the mood, your own feeling, which people will pick up on, and just help create a better evening for everyone involved.
Usually, and bear in mind, you know, you don't just have to. You can't. It's pre-making the whole drink isn't your only option. You can do partial things. Our industry is constantly arguing about the merits of batching, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the earliest forms of batching we ever did was juicing lemon. You know, it's got the benefits of batching in consistency, but also in how quick and easy it is to work with that ingredient. If you're making a round of drinks for your friends and someone has theirs just a little bit too sweet, and you're like, don't worry, I'm going to fix it for you. You go out to the shop, buy a lemon, chop the lemon, juice the lemon, strain the lemon, put it in their drink. By this point, their drink's warm. Everyone's really just being polite to each other now, but it's a lot of negativity there. Whereas buying 20 lemons, juicing a lot of them, straining it, it does get bitter over time if you leave the pulp in, and sticking it in a bottle. That bottle's going to have a shelf life of a good week for a lot of purposes. You know, we prefer not to sort of leave citrus or anything more than like 2 or 3 days, depending on how it's meant to be used. But I tell you what I would rather is a daiquiri with 5-day-old lime juice, but in a nice relaxed setting, compared to one with a la mid, you know, perfectly fresh lime juice, but where all hell is breaking loose and the salad's caught fire.
Yeah, so just to summarize, batching, yeah, can be just having sufficient numbers of ingredients, like sufficient quantity, and take away any of the pre-work, such as juicing, and having that all ready to hand and easy to use. Because you mentioned there's one thing having the juice of a lemon, but if it's in a bottle that's easy to pour and measure out, that also makes quite a big difference to being able to apply that ingredient to a drink.
Exactly. I mean, your other big things, balancing sweet and sour is, you know, when you're experienced at it, it's pretty easy. You develop a palate for balancing it. But in the meantime, the easiest thing is just to work to parts. make yourself a 1-to-1 sugar syrup. I know that there's all kinds of contention about 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, but for drinks at home, to me, it's obviously a 1-to-1 affair because, for one, it's dead easy. You take any container, let's say, I don't know, this shaker, fill it with caster sugar, stick it in a blender with the same amount of water, and what you get out of that is 1-to-1 sugar syrup. From there, all of your sweet and sour drinks are balanced equal parts by volume between that sugar and pretty much any citrus. There is some variation between citrus and the amount of acidity, but it's pretty small, especially when you choose 20 lemons, by which point you have the average of 20 lemons, which is the average of most lemons. So at that point, let's say you have I don't know, just a shot glass, and you want to make a daiquiri. That daiquiri is now dead simple. You fill this twice with rum, flat, once with lime, in, once with sugar, in. And that is going to be an absolutely conventionally perfectly balanced daiquiri. And then, because you've got your sugar and your lime already made, if anyone is a little bit fussy about wanting a little bit drier, a little bit sweeter, you can just splash it in, as opposed to going out buying a lemon, juicing it, or trying to dissolve caster sugar into an already shaken ice cold liquid. That's what I mean by prep. You make your citrus juice dead easy. You make your sugar syrup, and everything else becomes extremely easy. And from there, pretty much all sweet and sour cocktails, which is most of what people often want to drink at gatherings, at home, will be, one way or another, a balance of 2-1-1.
Perfect. That sounds really easy to follow, and can be obviously the variation of that. You take a gin or a rum or a vodka or a whiskey, and then you take a lemon or a lime and sugar syrup. You've got quite a wide array of drinks there using a very simple formula. I did ask you this, I think, last week, was if you had a sort of go-to cocktail at home that always, from your personal experience, never fails to impress, is easy to make, and adds a touch of sort of sophistication or elegance to a cocktail party or a gathering at home. And you told me it was the
French 75. French 75 to me is in many ways perfect cocktail, but also is often it's an easy, perfect cocktail experience. Gin, lemon, a little splash of sugar, and some sparkling wine, champagne. There are very few people who object to any of those ingredients. Yes, we got a couple of people who don't like gin, but if they're going to like it in anything, it's going to be this. It's a beautifully easy drink because, though, yes, classic definitions of a French 75 are a little bit different to what I'm about to say, those also would have been made with older forms of champagne like demi-sec. So if you want to make a super speedy French 75, it is equal parts gin, lemon, and sugar to about 3 parts of sparkling wine, which means if you're doing it for 20 people, that's a bottle of lemon, a bottle of sugar, a bottle of gin, and 3 bottles of sparkling wine, pretty much going into a fancy bucket. That is an immense amount of booze. It is going to be more or less perfectly balanced. And if you taste it and decide it's not, you've got your lemon and your sugar to tweak it. You're tweaking, 40 drinks at once, there and then. It's stock logic, it's soup logic. It's a perfect entertainer as well, because if you have all the ingredients, you can be seen to kind of just like bust it out, sort it out quick and easy. And I made it at a party a couple of years ago. I was kind of mad at my girlfriend because she'd mentioned at this party that I was a cocktail bartender, whereupon everyone obviously is like, "Yeah, make cocktails." I'm like, "No, it's my day off. Why would I do that?" But you get pressured into it, and eventually I did that. I basically said, if you make lemon juice and some sugar syrup, I'll make cocktails. I was also pretty drunk already, so I didn't want to make too much of a fool of myself. But they had 3 bottles of champagne, and I made it up. There were like some flowers in the hall. I took a couple of the petals, I garnished it up with that. I used some of the lemon peels and stuff, and put it on like ice in a fancy punch bowl. And I had people telling me it was the best cocktail they'd ever had. And immediately I was just like, well, no, it's not. It's good, but it's not incredible. And then it kind of occurred to me that actually the best cocktail they ever have is probably the best cocktail experience they ever have. And what their experience has been, they've been at a party, they've been having a lovely time, lots of friends, lots of good vibes. Turns out someone's boyfriend is, this expert mixologist, and he immediately puts together something with complete confidence, a little bit of flair, which absolutely everyone likes, using fresh ingredients to which no one objects, and presents it beautifully. Like, that's a better experience than most people are going to get in a good bar. So I don't think it's the best drink they've ever had, but it will definitely be one of their drink experiences. And to me, that's the same.
And when you talk about sort of presentation as well, the thing I always think about, cocktail trading company, in my mind, you're famous for great names, great service, and we did a really interesting presentation together about what you called the 1%, some of the little tips and tricks to amplifying the guest experience in a way that may not even be aware of, but you know, a great first experience, a great last experience, and the bits in the middle. But your drinks always look great as well. You know, they're always a bit sort of cheeky and fun. Are there any is there any sort of top tips or hacks or advice you could give people to maybe finishing drinks in a way that looks beautiful in your own home without too much effort?
The thing we've always kind of resorted to is what we call like doing the silly excellently. If you have a really silly and fun idea but don't commit to it, then it's only ever that. Whereas if you take something that's really silly but go hardcore on it, then suddenly it'll just kind of blow people away. Like putting a drink in a noodle box wasn't that unique, but soaking to rehydrate and then deep frying and reseasoning with cocktail ingredients, noodles to put on top of that, no one had seen that before. And then just putting the 2 straws into one of those chopstick wrappers, no one had seen that before. That's kind of the thing. It's like, take a silly idea, something that makes you smile, and make it really, really slick. French 75, you could have some fun with that. Like, just get some mascara and get people to draw silly moustaches on themselves or something like that. Like, just play off kind of like the rhetoric and the stupidity of it, but commit to it. And that tends to me to have like a more positive effect than just hyper garnishing something. Like, you know, we've got this reputation for doing crazy garnishes, but actually historically a lot of our garnishes have been quite simple because, you know, we don't want to crowd stuff out. It's particularly garnishing at home. You know, a drink in a frozen glass with the correct window on it and a single well thought out garnish element, that looks slick as anything.
Yeah, and you mentioned there about the frozen glass, actually, which is quite an interesting thing I'd like to get onto, which is ice and glassware. If you wouldn't mind elaborating on those 2 points, please.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the key things, I guess I mentioned daiquiris earlier. I always call it the daiquiri test. And it is kind of like coming back to that objectivity, subjectivity, science versus enjoyment thing. You know, if the science leads to enjoyment, then great. But similar to that, especially with some of the more junior team members, we often have people pitch ideas for cocktails that feature, you know, these incredible techniques. And at the end of it, the question is always, does it taste as good as a daiquiri? And to me, that's a great example because it's not so much about valuing simplicity. It's about not falsely valuing complexity. And there's a fundamental satisfaction that we need to have from our drinks before they're that relevant. And temperature is just a massive one. You go making a drink absolutely perfectly ice cold and stick it in a warm glass, there are a series of downsides to that. But beyond that, the biggest mistake people make at home is using freezer ice. You know, across the country, pretty much all bars use, to some extent, the same ice in that no one gets it fresh out of a freezer unless it's block ice for keeping a drink consistent. Most ice comes out of an ice well, like I've got in front of me, or in your pub, you know, it's just got a plastic bucket or whatever. But that ice has all come up in temperature. That's all pretty much on the dot of 0 degrees. It can't be colder than that because it's been ambient for so long. And it can't be warmer than that because ice that's warmer than 0 is no longer ice, it's water. And this means that it chills and dilutes, and it literally cannot do one without the other. And though we love to complain about watery drinks when something's become over diluted, an under diluted is an equally terrible drink. And unlike with sweet and sour, where we tend to be fairly good at identifying when that's gone wrong, when it comes to dilution, most of us aren't that educated. Most of us don't go, this lacks dilution. You know, you just taste it and it's not right, and you often assume it's either sweet or sour. So for drinks at home, literally the quickest and biggest improvement they could make is getting that ice out of the freezer like 20 minutes in advance, and then it come up in temperature a little bit. And then in the space where you had that ice, get your glasses in there. That's partly because drinks in, you know, frozen glasses look sexy AF, but it's also because it's going to keep them ice cold. If you want a slightly more thorough but entertaining answer on what the, shall we say, the neurology is of drinking alcohol faster as a result of it being in a warmer glass, I can give that to you. But it will basically trash your party and your house.
So the right, so getting your stuff to the right temperature. And you did mention to me about again, the sort of choices of having the world's best drink, but at the wrong temperature versus a pretty average drink served really crisp and cold, exactly the temperature you'd want it to, you'd probably go for that average one at the right temperature every time. So temperature seems to be a very important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it across everything, like, because temperature isn't an ingredient, and we are very we're very focused as an industry on ingredients, then we often just kind of forget about it. But if I make for you, the finest cup of coffee made from the best beans, extracted and processed in the best way, and I've weighed everything, I've even weighed the water, I've used the kettle that boils it to exactly 88, I've used the second wash, I've done all this stuff, and then I leave it on the side for 20 minutes afterwards. It's hotter than anything else in the house, but it's cold. And similarly, I would rather have a crap lager at 0.1 degrees than an excellent beer at, too warm for what it's meant to be. And very much the same thing goes for cocktails.
Yeah, and so you made 2 points there about temperature and dilution. I want to just come back to dilution, because that is something from a personal experience I really noticed. Actually, I remember making some drinks for a friend's wedding many years ago, and I thought I could bartend and couldn't really. And the thing that I got wrong was dilution, because it's all being batched. I hadn't accounted for how much water would go into the drink if it had been shaken. And I'd followed the recipe to the mill. It should have been perfect, but it was overpowering because it was too strong.
Yeah.
And if I'd, a bit older now, if I'd known that adding sort of some chilled water to that would have got it to the right dilution, that guy it was a good wedding, but it would have been a bit better had I been a better bartender. So I think it's worth coming back and making that point about dilution and the importance of getting water into that drink. And I think you mentioned something about chilled water at some point in last week, but I can't remember the exact details.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of the interesting thing, Difford's Guide has contributed so much over the years and been so fundamental to so many bartenders learning that it's easy to kind of miss the forest for the trees, I guess. They've always had, chilled mineral water listed as an ingredient. And certainly when I was learning from Difford's, I kind of saw that as, what? I don't need that. But, Difford's as a resource was so often aimed at people making drinks at home. So even back then, they were aware of the fact that people were making drinks with freezer ice. So, you can do that. I personally prefer to have, the right temperature ice. But yeah, if you want to drink there and then, stick in sort of 20, 25 mils of tap water as you go. You can use mineral water if you want, but
just cold water.
I think water's just going to be fine. And yeah, give it a shake with your freezer ice.
Great. Okay. So we've covered, just to recap, we've talked about a bit about atmosphere and how you can improve on that by sort of planning, preparing for your drinks. We've talked about particularly on choosing your drinks. It sounds like, keep it simple. So minimize the amount of ingredients, get your sweet and your sour balance done right, which can be helped by using a simple syrup. Choosing ingredients that are likely not to offend a group of people, and things like gin and champagne and the French 75 being a classic example of that. Chilling your glassware. We talked a little bit about sort of garnishes, and you said that if you're going for a theme, just commit. Don't do it half-heartedly. Go the whole hog, and people will love it. Don't just start something and don't finish it. What would be your other sort of key areas that I've not asked you about yet in terms of producing a great drink at home?
I think seasoning. So our industry is really focused on aroma. Food and drink generally always talks about aroma. And the way people navigate their understanding of drinks is also largely based on aroma. But realistically, taste is always the more important thing. We tend to confuse the two because we tend to use the words interchangeably. But taste is kind of where it's at. And sweet and sour is already, I would probably say about 70% of what tastes good, just getting that right. You think of most of the bad drinks you've had, it's usually when it's gone one way or the other. And certainly, when the sweet sour balance is off, that's usually a much more prevalent negative thing than, say, the lemon juice was past its best, which would be more of an aroma. Salt and bitter are two other primary flavors or tastes. And the salt one is pretty straightforward in that, we need salt for active transport. We we can't live without salt. As a result, it tastes incredible. But if you go too much of it, then it's suddenly like Simon Cowell repeatedly smashing the red button levels of nuts. It's interesting because salt isn't conventionally seen as an ingredient in cocktails, but there isn't a single thing on the planet that doesn't taste better with the right amount of salt, and that amount is never, ever zero. Every single drink of CPC gets salt. We've got a solution we put into everything. If you make a little salt solution at home, grab like an Angostura bottle or something like that, empty it out, maybe keep the contents, and refill it with a salt solution, which is like 200 mils to maybe 3 teaspoons of Malden. And a dash of that in every single drink will make them better, basically, than any of the bars which aren't doing them, which is pretty much all bars. After that, bitter is kind of the counteract to it. If you take sweet and sour, for example, we all know they balance each other out. They don't balance each other from a taste perspective. They balance each other from a flavor perspective. You know, adding sugar to hydrogen doesn't decrease the number of hydrogen ions in it. It decreases the extent to which our brain perceives it as sour. And the same thing goes with salt and bitter. So salt and bitter balance each other out in a similar way. And they're kind of, when they're done right, they're kind of the difference between good and great. Like if you imagine that, you know, that's 70% for getting sweet and sour right, this is kind of the next 10%. But both salt, as I said, and bitterness have their caveats. And the key thing, seeing as I've been talking about all this scientific stuff, is just to go back to, you know, the humanity side of it and say that don't make drinks like a stereotype bartender. You know, every bartender's gone through that phase where they're making, you know, their boulevardiers for every last person on a Saturday night and giving out the drinks which you as a bartender like. You know, it takes us, let's be honest, months and years to get over that quite obnoxious trait from working, you know, 40 to 70 hours a week behind the bar. When you're doing it at home, it's quite easy to make that mistake on repeat, especially when your customers, your friends, aren't going to admit that they're not enjoying the drinks that much. Try to get an idea of what your friends are actually going to like. If they don't know what a Negroni is, don't ever give them a bitter drink. Just don't. It's not a kind thing to do. Yeah, I always joke about the Negroni thing, because if you say to someone, you know, would you like a Negroni? And they go, oh, what's in a Negroni? And you say gin, vermouth, and Campari. And they maybe don't know what Campari is, but, you know, they're going to say, like, that sounds delicious. You're going to get them a drink which they hate. If they haven't had Campari before, they're going to despise it. So kind of just having that, like, consideration at home, as it has been, like, the core theme of this whole chat. It's as much about avoiding negativity as it is about embracing positivity.
And can I ask you one question then about, I'm thinking like sort of simple styles of drink. What's your view about, you know, sours as a drink, and particularly, I'm curious about egg white, because it's quite it gets omitted from a lot of recipes because people think it's not something that people want to drink, but it also does add great body to a cocktail, and now there's alternatives to it. What's your view on that ingredient for cocktails at home?
I actually think, well, I'm quite into my egg white drink. To take it down to its building blocks, you know, if we're going to construct like the perfect cocktail, we're essentially taking sweet and sour, you know, in whatever form, salt and bitter to some extent, and then trigeminal aspects. Trigeminal aspects are anything to do with things that aren't either taste or aroma, but are flavor. So texture, dilution, actually, temperature, they're all those. And your egg white as an ingredient, which basically doesn't contain any kind of sapid compounds. Like I think only 2% of the population can actually taste egg white. The rest of us just, you know, perceive it as a texture. You know, if we're using it like that, it's a texturizer. And, you know, as anyone who's compared, you know, cheap ice cream to really good quality stuff, the difference isn't so much in the aromas or the taste. It's often in the texture. It's in, again, you know, the absence of those ice crystals. Beautiful cream, but also quite light. And egg white kind of does a similar thing in a lot of cocktails. It's taking the sweet and sour, it's balancing that kind of that almost jagged edge of acidity by spreading it out. And to me, that's kind of why it is a sour as such. It hasn't necessarily got as much conventional sugar in it, but because it's spread out amidst like kind of a better texture, that sourness isn't off-putting. There are replacements for egg whites. I haven't found any which are anywhere near as good enough, to be honest. So while I understand people's dietary or I guess ethical decisions in not using it, I would always go with it until I was told otherwise. And at home, you know, it's pretty simple. You want to get it right, you just give it a dry shake. If you've got a really good arm and a really good whip action, you can probably go without that. But most people shaking cocktails don't kind of have that experience of specifically how to move it, which isn't a matter of strength. It's a whip motion, you know. So shake it once without the ice, shake it again with the ice, and it'll come out super, super fluffy.
Okay, great. And just coming back to you talk about the building blocks of a great cocktail. You really started and you've doubled down on that sort of sweet sour balance, and then we've talked about that sort of salt bitter and the word you use there, which we've talked about many times, and it's escaped me now, which is the sort of temperature, dilution, and texture. Just coming back to bitter again. So I understand where you get that the salt from. What sort of sources of bitter where would they get that from at home? What would the common sources of bitter be, please?
Sure. I mean, you have pouring bitters and sort of dashing bitters, I guess. So things like Angostura. It's not, you know, if you taste Angostura on its own, it's more intense. It's not actually that bitter, but it does still confer some bitterness. You've got your Camparis and things like that, which do taste pretty good. But even, you know, when we characterize ingredients as assets to a drink, we kind of fail to understand it in reverse of that, if you know what I mean. Like, sugar isn't sugar, it's a form of sweetener. When we think about where vanilla comes from, it doesn't help us to think of a vanilla pod. We should be thinking of it as a chemical, vanillin, which is highly present in vanilla, but it's also present in whiskey. And a lot of bitterness also comes through from heavily cask aging, first fill, heavily charred casks, you know, from aging spirits in them. So, you know, part of why people, for example, argue about lemon or lime juice is because of the relative levels of astringency between the two. And bourbon already has quite a lot of astringency in there. So that and the bitterness inherent in it definitely contribute on the small but significant levels to the overall quality of the outcome. And, you know, a whiskey sour is a simple and fabulous drink.
Okay. And can I ask then, from obviously at the minute it's a funny place with COVID-19. When things get back to normal, and hopefully that will be in July, if people were coming to cocktail trading company and you wanted to show them one of your signature drinks that you're sort of famous for, what cocktail might you recommend? I realize flavor profile would be one thing, but if you were going to sort of suggest a seminal cocktail trading company drink, which drink would that be, and what would be in there?
Trying to think. I won't lie, this is the longest I've gone without making a CPC drink in 6, maybe 7 years. And I'm ashamed at how quickly some of that knowledge has left me. Let's say we've got a couple of people. I'd always like to show a bit of a spread, you know, show the variation, both in terms of the presentation and the emotions behind it, you know, whether it's meant to be frivolous and fun, whether it's meant to be a little bit more serious, but also in terms of the flavor. So the Bishop's Drop is a favorite of mine from the current menu. Comes in these badass little goblets. It is kind of like a rum boulevardier twist, but with some really nice warm, kind of like banana bready, walnut, port notes. Much more approachable than like the Negroni kind of drinks, for example. And it's garnished with Body of Christ, one of those little red things. And we have it in a little sacramental jug with the rosary beads and poured onto it. So it's a fun little bit of theatre. And because it contains spice rum, I get to say the power of spice compels you. Obviously, I need to have fun as well. Otherwise, the King Shilling is a really nice one. It's kind of halfway between like an Army and Navy and what's the other one? Gimlet. So kind of like heavily naval themed drink. The Vessel, these fabulous mugs, which Pete managed to get hold of. It's a super, super approachable drink, but with a really powerful backbone in it, thanks to the Navy gin. But it comes garnished with like a poker chip for our other venue, Murder Inc. So if you bring it back to them, they'll give you sort of a little nod of recognition, probably a shot. And it's kind of just fun to introduce people to other concepts, you know. Otherwise, the Molotov, which I can't show right now, but that's got a wonderful bit of theatre, and it kind of like it embodies our approach to drink somewhat. And that is, you know, it's a pre-made cocktail. It's backed in advance, But rather than using that just as an opportunity to lessen the strain of service, which it definitely does, and when we're getting slammed on the bar, everyone on the floor knows to try to upsell the quicker and easier drink. But it's better than the drink which it's kind of attributing, in that it is a twist on a Moscow Mule, but a Moscow Mule, by being this much vodka, lime, bitters maybe, and ginger beer, by the time you got the dilution, only about half of that drink is actually fizzy. And as I say, trigeminals are important. Carbonation is one of them. When something is down by 50% of what it should be, you often see what's missing or perceive what's missing rather than what's actually there. So by batching the drink in advance, using fresh ginger, which will clarify, and basically putting a lot more love into it, because we make 10 liters of it at a time. There's no fresh citrus. There's nothing really to go off. We then carbonate the entire thing with our gas rig, and the outcome is legitimately a much better drink than if you just make a Moscow Mule from scratch. Meanwhile, the whole Molotov cocktail thing, it serves in a fabulously branded bottle. We have a bit of like a Russian newspaper from it's a reprint of the Armistice Day newspaper printed on that day in Moscow. Kind of the concept behind the story, which is hilarious, and it's got a little bit of flash forward to it. So as a customer gets it, the bottle pretty much just goes up in flames, which took a lot of time to get right. A lot of people, us, not them, were burned doing it, but it's just a really fun kind of jokey serve, which embodies the brand very nicely.
And that's a good example of you sort of committing the full way to your, you have your theme and it goes right through all the way to the fine detail on the newspaper that goes into the top of the bottle. Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned Diffords earlier, and I was just curious, is there any book you'd like to recommend to people looking to make drinks at home? I mean, there might be several, but any that spring to mind?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. What you gain from a book always depends on how communicative it is, regardless of what's in there, which is where some people in our industry have kind of struggled. Just because you're an excellent bartender and absolutely revolutionary doesn't necessarily mean you're that good at writing a book, unfortunately, and making it accessible to people. But it also depends as much on, where the individual is in terms of their stage of learning. I think like balancing those variables, Tristan Stevenson's first one, The Curious Bartender, I think it's a bang for buck. It teaches so much broad scale stuff, but also a lot of the more specific, more kind of cool and motivating bits. I think that's a fabulous book. But in terms of if you just want to produce excellent flavors, early on, I kind of mentioned that taste and aroma are two separate things, and taste is kind of where it matters. We're still always going to be dominated by aroma in terms of advertising and describing. So the most useful book for me has always been The Flavor Thesaurus. I think it's written by Nikki Segnet. You can get it on Amazon Prime. It'll be with you tomorrow, depending what time it is. And it's basically an alphabetical list of what works with what. And some of it's going to be absolutely dead easy. But my first global cocktail comp, I got to Trinidad for the World Finals based on a combination which I discovered in that book, because I hadn't been making cocktails very long. And if I hadn't got that book, I wouldn't have gotten there, and I wouldn't have got the exposure, and maybe I wouldn't have met Andy and Ollie, which is crazy. But, it's amazing for cooking and for making drinks. It's just called The Flavor Thesaurus. It is fabulous.
Yeah, I've got The Flavor Thesaurus. The Flavor Thesaurus, and it's a great reference book, and it's quite a pleasing book to have on your shelf as well. I think it indicates it has a certain sophistication to it, I think. Yeah. And at the minute, you are providing a cocktails at home service, I believe. If you're lucky enough to live somewhere within delivery distance of Cocktail Trading Company, could you just let me know what drinks are currently available?
Yeah, sure. So we've got, a tiny little bit of backstory. Basically, we didn't want to kind of just compromise our drinks into bottles. The whole purpose was very few of the menu drinks are actually suitable for the bottle, so we're not just going to do that. We don't want to just stick a classic in a bottle necessarily. Things change in bottles, and also the diminished experience people have making drinks at home isn't our fault, but it is our responsibility. So we developed a range of long carbonated cocktails, which kind of fights the trend of sweet soft drinks, but also embraces the trend of highballs. So those are innovative, very affordable. I think we're definitely one of the cheapest in London, and super tasty and fun. So we developed a completely new range for that. And then we did some classics. People obviously want classics, which we do in bigger bottles, but we've kind of remastered them. The the spec we would usually use to make an old fashioned in service doesn't taste very good when you come back to it, you know, having left it in a bottle overnight. Something, it just seems to flatten, it loses its brightness. So we kind of re-seasoned everything and repurposed it. But I mean, I've got fridges full of them down here, but we've got kind of that Moscow Mule twist I said before. I kind of refined that for the bottle. We've got the apple saffron fizz, a delicious hibiscus Collins, which is quite a lot like a pink G&T, but nothing artificial, nothing too sweet, and a lot of gin. Got a mojito twist, which is kind of a personal project because, you know, mojitos, so many awards for that drink, but as a result, so many kind of great failures. It's done in such volume that it's often, well, terrible. And particularly bottled mojitos are usually dreadful. So that was a fun challenge to me for making a good bottled mojito, and I like to think we kind of did it. The Buchu Highball, which is like a Scotch and soda twist with Buchu tea, which is just one of the most bizarre aromas. And then we've got a clarified and carbonated corpse reviver for the classic. We've got like a Negroni and an old fashioned. They've all been made completely differently. And then my favorite, the one which did take loads of experimentation, was getting a freezer stable martini. So our freezer is at -20, and this is still a liquid despite having the correct levels of dilution and seasoning in it. So it's a very unconventional form of a martini. It contains some sugar and some salt and a few different forms of acidity. But I think it makes a much better martini, and it comes out colder than any one you get in a bar. So kind of the purpose was not just in, hey, we can still do drinks to deliver. It was, you know what, this is a challenge, but I still reckon we can make them better.
Amazing. Yeah, I've learned a lot through that conversation, particularly I think one of the big wins to me sounds like the little addition of the secret sauce of a small amount of saline solution into into any drink to make it better just sounds like I can't believe I hadn't really clocked that before as a sort of top tip or technique. Out of curiosity, you mentioned the martini that you've had to tinker with to get it into that consistency at that temperature, and you mentioned the mojito, and I was just wondering if you could if you don't have to, but if you could tell me some of the considerations you had to go through, or techniques, or how you managed to get that style of drink into a bottle form that would last and work well.
Yeah. Well, you know, mojito is a perfect example of that, you know, kind of that idyllic construction of cocktails. It's got your balance of sweet and sour. Maybe, you know, someone who's been muddling all day, all those lines, I can imagine a single trickle of sweat ending up in it, and that can be your imaginary salt. It's not classically an ingredient, but especially not the sweat, but every single mojito tastes especially great with a little bit of salt. But the muddling the mojito extracts the oils, and that's kind of what gives you a slight touch of bitterness. Then the aroma is coming from the mint. And finally, by churning it through crushed ice, you reach like this peak cool. By using, you know, crushed ice that wasn't straight from the freezer, you've also achieved the dilution. So in terms of the building blocks of the cocktail, there's a great deal going on. And that's before we've gotten to, you know, the steamy sex scene between Pierce Brosnan and Halle Berry, the James Bond implications. And, you know, there's a lot of things which launched that into worldwide acclaim. But fundamentally, it's just a brilliant drink. Like, it's just a simple, great drink. And there's nothing which anyone really objects to in there, which is key to its success. So for me, the challenge was in achieving the same thing, but also with making concessions over what you can and can't use. I'm not using lime juice in it. So I made an acid blend. It is a blend of citric, malic, succinic, tartaric, lactic to give it a kind of almost milky mouthfeel, and one more, just ascorbic. But by getting like a broad profile, you don't get the same satisfaction as you get from lime juice, but you get a different satisfaction. Acidity plays kind of better together when there's multiple forms of them. That's why, you know, a citric acid solution never really provides the same thing as, say, lime juice. It's not just the aroma, it's the acids that are less complex. After that, use a couple of different kinds of sugar to kind of get some toasted notes in there, but not so much that we kind of lose the color of it. Then we use a couple of different kinds of mint. So we've got like a mint tea, we've got a classic like dried mint, and then we've got a lime oil extract, which kind of gives it that body. After that, it's a blend of a couple of different styles of rum. So we're replacing kind of some of the complexity that you get from things like lime with just like a little bit more of an interesting blend of profiles of rums. And finally, to get that satisfaction in there, we've absolutely carbonated the hell out of it. The name of the drink is the Ain't No Hito. It is as much a joke about being a mojito as it is about not being a mojito. And you know, as anyone will tell you, you know, there's this running joke that the place that created the cocktail is often the place that does it the worst. And certainly with our understanding of the mojito, when you go to Cuba, you have a very different mojito to what you expect. And they'll often use a lot of like sparkling water. Places in the UK, you know, some of the time there's sparkling water. Some of the time there's only just soda from a gun because then the level's a little bit short or whatever. But there was definitely an opportunity to make this drink properly fizzy. And by using a, you know, a gas rig, it's, you know, champagne levels of fizziness, which adds so much complexity, but also kind of switches your brain on to the flavors through the activation of, well, pain impulses through trigeminals. So a lot of experimentation, but the reason these bowl drinks are kind of fun and the reason I'm very happy with how they've come out is because I'm not making one drink to order, which has a limited scope for experimentation. When I developed that 8 Mojito spec, I was happy to spend 3 days on it because by the time all this crap's over, I might have sold over 1,000 of them, probably more. So might as well put the work in on it. And when I make them, I make a couple of hundred of them at once and just factory it.
Great. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's there's a reason you and I have spoken for many, many years about many things. And yeah, I think anyone who sort of watches this, we will type up all the sort of the key points into it, like a short condensed form. It's been a really interesting conversation. I really appreciate you giving me that time. And do you deliver us, how do you access the cocktails, not through Deliveroo, which I know is the most common platform. You can purchase them directly through your website, is that correct? Or like you go to your website as the first port of call?
Yeah, our website's got a link to Slurp. Slurp are a fabulous e-commerce platform. Unlike Deliveroo, which is kind of like a marketplace, the main benefit of being on Deliveroo is that you're part of that market. But, you know, they're very aware of that, which is why their commission is horrific. Commission, which hurts drinks much more than food, where the margins tend to be better. Slurp will design an e-commerce space for you in exchange for a much, much smaller commission. And they've been an absolute blast to work with. I recommend them to anyone who's considering doing similar. But as a result, we've got a Slurp space, which is on our website. You can order through there. Alternatively, we're also on Flask, which is an app, and they deliver a little further afield. And I'm also setting up with independent couriers. So if anyone just has any commissions or requests, or just, I don't know, it's a bit of a faff for delivery, just contact us directly. We can figure it out, and we'll sort whatever deal. You know, there's nothing stopping us posting things around. Well, we've posted as far as Amsterdam so far. Maybe not Australia, that could be a bit hard, but otherwise, the bottled cocktails last pretty much forever, so they'll be fine in the post. So
South London's not too far a stretch then, you can get that far for me.
Not at all. In fact, I recently took a jump bike to Streatham Hill, which was a nightmare, but otherwise fine.
Thank you, Elliot. It's really good of you. Enjoyed the conversation so much. Look forward to writing this all up, and yeah, look forward to enjoying a drink with you back at Cocktail Trading Company in hopefully at the start of July, fingers crossed. And
sounds good.
Yeah, wish you all the very best.
And you, thank you for your time.
Take care, Elliot. All the best. Bye.
Bye-bye.